All right, so it's a pleasure to be hosting the third COMSOC video seminar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Aziz. I'm based in Sydney, and I'll be the chair for this session. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for changing around the time, as it's very much in the spirit of social choice. But it turns out this is not the most popular time, so we might want to revert to some other time at some other spots. And now that Dominic has ramped up the security, let's hope we do not get any disruptions. So before we start the session, a few housekeeping items. The first one is that if you want to participate in the RUMP session next week, Ule has been asking people to sign up. So I believe there still are some spots. So please go to the website and sign up. As far as timekeeping is concerned, we're going to have 2 seminar presentations, each of 20 minutes, and we will have 10 minutes of questions. After the first presentation, we're going to have a coffee break. If you want to stretch your legs, feel free to do so. But if you want to join us in one of the hangout rooms, you can join us for 10 minutes and talk to some of your colleagues. When the presentation starts, I will request you to press the mute button and stay on mute. If you have any pressing questions or any follow-up questions, please type in the chat, or you could also try to virtually raise your hand and ask a question. So I believe this is a good time to practice our virtual hand raising. So please look into this participant button, and there you can see how to raise your hand. All right, so seems many people did get a hang of raising hands. So I think we should move forward. So the first presentation is going to be by Makoto Yokoo. For those of you who attend computer science, AI, multi-agent systems conferences, Makoto does not need any introduction. But since this is a very general audience, let me just say a few words about Makoto. Makoto is a distinguished professor at Kyushu University, and he's a leading figure in multi-agent systems. He has worked on many different topics, including constraint satisfaction, auction design, and cooperative games. And in the last few years, his group has been making substantial contributions to matching market design. And this particular presentation will also be on a similar topic. So Makoto, it's all yours. And let's try this screen sharing and start the presentation.
Hi, I'm Makoto Yokoo from Kyushu University, Japan. My talk is entitled Game-Theoretic Analysis for Two-Sided Matching with Resource Allocation. So let me start with the take-home message of this research. Beautiful theoretical results have been obtained for two-sided matching, which deals with matching of 2 types of agents, such as students and schools, or medical residents and hospitals. However, these results are obtained under the assumption that each school or hospital has a predefined capacity limit. We argue that this assumption is too strict because real-life situation would be more flexible. For example, if we assign students to schools, if we find a certain school is very popular, probably we can increase its capacity, say, by hiring a part-time teacher. And this paper introduced a new model that incorporates such flexibility. Namely, the capacity of each school is endogenously determined by allocated resources. By using this model, we can determine the capacity flexibly according to student preferences. However, there exists a very strong trade-off between fairness and efficiency. Here, efficiency means student welfare. And then we develop a new mechanism that strikes a good balance for this trade-off. Okay. Okay, this is an outline of today's talk. Let me start with some background. And this model is related to two different problems. One is resource allocation problem. In this resource allocation problem, the goal is to determine appropriate resource allocation to multiple agents whose demands or preferences are known. And this problem is kind of classic in computer science. Also, finding an optimal solution can be computationally difficult. Say it can be NP hard, but various algorithms for finding optimal or semi-optimal solutions have been proposed. And the other problem is two-sided matching. The goal is to find an appropriate matching between two types of agents, for example, students at schools or medical residents at hospitals. If the capacity and preferences of one side, for example, schools are known, appropriate matching can be obtained even when the preference of the other side, for example, students are not known in advance, by using a strategy-proof mechanism such as deferred acceptance mechanism. So basically, we already know that how to handle resource allocation and matching separately. But can we solve them simultaneously? This is a question we ask in this research. Now, let me describe the model of model and some desirable properties related to this model. So basically, students and resources are allocated to each project, and the capacity of each project is endogenously determined by the allocated resources. One possible application domain of this model is a school choice program with part-time teachers. So we are going to allocate students and part-time teachers to project schools, and the capacity of the school becomes larger if we allocate a part-time teacher for that school. Traditionally, this problem is considered as two separated problems. So basically, first we allocate resources to projects based on some expectation, say based on historical data. For example, based on historical data, this green project seems to be more popular than this blue project. So we allocate more resources to it. And then as a result, the capacity of this green project becomes 4, and the capacity of this project, blue project becomes 2. And then we match students to projects using the fixed capacity limits based on the resource allocation in step 1, say using a deferred acceptance mechanism. However, if the expectation in step 1 is wrong, say the blue school turns out to be more popular, the obtained solution is suboptimal. So we need to solve these two problems simultaneously in order to obtain better results. Okay? So let me describe the model more in detail. So there exists a set of students, and each student has a strict preference over projects. And there is a set of projects, and it has a strict preference over students. And there are resources. Resource is not an agent, it has no preference at all, but it must be exclusively and indivisibly allocated to one project. It has a capacity, and the capacity of a project is equal to the sum of capacities of allocated resources. Okay? So for example, if one resource with capacity 2 and another resource with capacity 3 is allocated to green project, its capacity becomes 5. Okay? So let me discuss several desirable properties. We say a matching is feasible if there exists a resource allocation such that each project can accommodate assigned students. So naturally, a mechanism must obtain a feasible matching. We say that a mechanism is strategy-proof if no student gains by misreporting her preference. Okay? Also, we say a matching is fair if no student has justified envy. So what is justified envy? So for this green-haired student, she is assigned to blue project, although she prefers green project. And also a yellow-haired student is assigned to green project, So naturally, this green-haired student has an envy toward this student. And we say that this envy is justified since this green project prefers this green-haired student over this yellow-haired student. So we say matching is fair if no student has justified the envy. Also, there are several properties related to student welfare efficiency. So the strongest one is Pareto efficiency. We say a matching is Pareto efficient if we can't move a group of students to better projects without disturbing other students under any possible resource allocation. And also, we say a matching is non-wasteful if we cannot move one student, not a group of students, in this case, one student to a better project without disturbing other students under any possible resource allocation. Then we say a matching is weakly non-wasteful if we can't move one student to a better project without disturbing other students under the current resource allocation. So these three definitions becomes weaker and weaker in this direction. And finally, we say matching is resource efficient if no resources allocate to an unanimously less preferred project. We say a project is unanimously less preferred if all students prefer not allocating any resource to such a project. And please note that in our definition of non-wastefulness requires that we cannot improve one student under any possible resource allocation. For example, this green-haired student hopes to be assigned to this green project, but it is impossible in the current resource allocation. But if we can swap these two resources, then we can improve this student without disturbing other students. So in this case, the original matching is considered wasteful. Okay? So about the relation among efficiency properties, naturally, Pareto efficiency implies non-wastefulness, and non-wastefulness implies weak non-wastefulness. Also, Pareto efficiency implies resource efficiency. Okay? Now, let me describe two impossibility results and two existing mechanisms. First, impossibility result says that there exists a case where no matching is fair and non-wasteful. But it is not very surprising because usually if we introduce some constraints, these two properties are incompatible. So another one is no strategy-proof mechanism satisfies fairness, weak non-wastefulness, and resource efficiency simultaneously. And this second one is kind of problematic because it means very weak requirements on student welfare are incompatible with fairness and strategy-proofness. And there are two existing mechanisms that can be applied to this model. One is called serial dictatorship SD, which is strategy proof and Pareto efficient, but very unfair. And the other one is RT-cap deferred acceptance ACDA, which is strategy proof and fair, but very inefficient. So now we face a dilemma. In our new model, student welfare would be improved because we have more flexibility on project capacities. So we can flexibly allocate resources such that student welfare will be increased. But if we require fairness, student welfare becomes extremely low. So we deploy a new mechanism that strikes a good balance between fairness and efficiency. So let me describe more detail about these two existing mechanisms. About serial dictatorship mechanism, a serial order among students is given, say like this, and then each student is assigned to her most favorite unfeasible project, while the assignment of previous students are fixed. So the first student, naturally she's assigned to her first choice. And for the second student, she's also assigned to her first choice. And for the third student, there's no more room for her first choice, so she's assigned to her second choice, and so on. And by definition, it is strategy proof and Pareto efficient, but it is too unfair because it completely ignores project preferences. So it doesn't use project preference at all. So another one is artist cap DA, SVDA. We fix the resource allocation, but to guarantee strategy proofness, it must be determined independently from students' preferences. And then determine project capacities by this allocation, and run the standard deferred acceptance, like this. So this mechanism is clearly strategy proof and fair. It also satisfies weak non-wastefulness, but it is too inefficient since resource allocation is done ignoring student preferences. Okay. Now, let me move on to main result, sample and vote deferred acceptance. Okay, basic idea is as follows. The difficulty we face is that to find a better resource allocation, naturally, we hope to know student preferences. So without knowing their preferences, we can find better allocation. However, if we ask their preferences, we usually lose strategy proofness since their preference conflict with each other. But there's one simple method for avoiding this difficulty. The way is as follows. So we divide the student into two groups, say group A and B, and ask the preference of group A students, and use the obtained information only to group B students. Then group A student has no incentive line because what they say does not matter themselves. So SVDA is based on this idea. More specifically, sample and vote deferred acceptance runs as follows. So first we divide the student into two groups, namely sampled students and regular students, and then run serial dictatorship for sampled students and allocate required resources. Then determine the remaining resource allocation based on the preferences of sampled students. And finally, we run SVDA for regular students. So let me show an example. So we first divide the students into two groups, say sampled student and regular students. Then we run serial dictatorship for sampled students. So our first student are assigned to our first choice, and naturally, basically, most of these sampled students are assigned to their first choices. Then we are going to allocate resources to accommodate these sampled students. Then we determine the remaining resource allocation based on the preference of sampled students. More specifically, each sampled student votes for her preferred project, and each resource is allocated to the winners. The detailed way of voting mechanism is not very significant, but assume we use a border count, and this green project turned out to be most popular, we allocate the resource to it. Then we run artist cap DA for regular students, like this. So about the properties of SVDA, it is strategy proof because for sampled students, since serial dictatorship is strategy proof, they have no incentive for misreporting. Also, their vote does not affect the assignment, so they have no incentive for manipulating the voting. Also, for regular students, since DA is strategy proof and project capacities are determined independently from the preferences, they have no incentive for misreporting. So the mechanism as a whole is strategy proof. Also, it satisfies weak non-wastefulness, since serial dictatorship is Pareto efficient and artist cap DA is weakly non-wasteful. Also, it satisfies resource efficiency. That means no shared resources allocated to an unanimously less preferred project. This is because no sampled student applied to it, and it never wins it in the voting, so no resources allocated to unanimously less preferred project. It is fair among regular students. That means any justified envy is toward sampled students. It's like a good balance between fairness and efficiency. I'm going to describe this point in the next slide. Okay. Okay, this graph shows a simulation result. Here, x-axis represents a measure for student welfare, and y-axis shows a measure for fairness. So something in the northeast corner is the best. So the larger is the better. So this is the result of ASCAP-DA. It's completely fair, but it's inefficient. This is the result of a serial dictatorship. It's efficient, but very unfair. So these are result by serial sample and vote deferred acceptance with parameter rho. Rho is the ratio of sampled students. So if the rho is small, it becomes close to the RT-cap-DA, but it is much more efficient. As the rho becomes larger, certainly it becomes closer serial dictatorship mechanism. So we can see that SVDA strike a good balance between fairness and efficiency. Okay, finally, conclusions. We introduce a new model that deals with resource allocation and matching simultaneously. And we identify the trade-off between fairness and efficiency. And we develop a new strategyproof mechanism that strikes a good balance between fairness and efficiency. Our future works include introducing more general constraints on resource allocation. For example, the number of resources allocated to each project is limited, or handling multidimensional resources. For example, when allocating refugee families, we need to allocate multiple resources such as houses, school seats, hospital beds, and so on. Okay, this is the end of my talk. Thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, let's unmute and give Makoto an applause. So we don't have, I don't see any questions in the chat. So if you have any questions right now, you can ask Makoto directly.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
So you use serial dictatorship as a benchmark. And of course, clearly that does not take into account the priorities of the schools. Have you thought about using a TTC extension? You know, that would clearly violate justified envy, but it would actually take into account the priorities of the school. So what I mean is you randomly allocate the resources to students, and then you introduce a TTC trading, which will reestablish efficiency and adjust the capacities to the schools, right?
Well, so
that could be an interesting comparison as a mechanism, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So actually, applying TTC in this model is not very easy because we are allocating resources as well as student projects. So if we fix the resources, namely the capacity of each project, it is easy to apply TTC, but the obtained result is no longer efficient, Pareto efficient, because if we change the resource allocation, the capacity change dynamically very drastic.
Right. Yes, you're right. I see that. Mm-hmm. I need to think a bit more about it because TTC would, some sort of TTC would take the priority somewhat into account versus serial dictatorship not doing that, but I have to think about it. Thanks.
Okay, so Agnes has a question about agent strategies. Her question is, have you considered the effect of one regular student lying to be a sample student?
Well, so in that case, so deferred acceptance is not a group strategy proof, right? In deferred acceptance, a collusion of students can benefit. But we can say that some of them obtain the same result, but some of them can be better in a group. So if we consider that kind of manipulation, we cannot guarantee group strategyproofness anyway. So, but it's not a fault of this SVDA mechanism, but it's deferred acceptance itself is vulnerable against this type of collusions.
Okay, another question is by Anne-Marie. Could it happen that in expectation it is better for a voter to misrepresent their preference?
Mm-hmm. Which one?
So it's the second last question
mm-hmm.
in the chat.
But because voters are sampled students, so basically they are guaranteed to obtain the best result regardless of the voting result. So they have no incentive for lying. So sampled students are kind of special privileged students, and basically they can get whatever they want. So their voting does not affect their assignment at all.
Okay, and Nisag has a question about the serial dictator phase. There could be many ways of assigning resources to projects such that each project is given capacity, at least the number of students assigned to it. Is there a specific tie-breaking rule used?
Yeah, it is true that there's multiple way for allocating resources to accommodate sampled students. So basically, we want to consume as little resource as possible. And we want to decide resource allocation based on the voting. But there's no clear way. We want to minimize the number, minimize the allocated resources for sampled student, but there's no clear definition of what is minimum. So basically, it is true that there's a multiple way for accommodate sampled student, but basically we want to try to minimize the number or minimize the capacities, but there's no clear way to how to define what is minimum. Okay.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Makoto, I had a question. You've focused on particular mechanisms and you've looked at their properties. I was wondering if you've looked at some fundamental questions that what is the complexity of maximizing border welfare subject to justified envy-freeness? Questions such as those.
Yeah, so I believe that just giving one matching and checking feasibility is NP hard. Feasibility is NP complete, and so the problem becomes one level higher than NP complete. So the decision version of the problem will be NP complete.
I see. Okay. Any other questions? Another question by Anne-Marie. Have you considered introducing upper bounds for resources per project?
Yeah, that is kind of our immediate future work. So introducing more constraints on how resources are allocated. Currently, each resource has a kind of a list of projects that can be assigned, and there's no basically there's no constraint except that one.
Okay, if there's no other question, I think this is a good time to stop. And Dominic is going to send us to one of the breakout rooms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really love that this meeting is being recorded voice. Makes one feel
We have one
comfortable.
more person in the waiting room.
HP. I previously admitted HP and nothing bad happened, so let's try again.
We should also admit Dell.
Dominic, we don't all get to see who's in the waiting room, do we?
Yeah, just co-host. We have about 5, 6 co-hosts.
So I was advertising your award-winning presentation, Dominic. So I've linked it in the chat.
So Dominic
Nice.
I mean, you might actually put it on YouTube. It's at the level of a TV station.
Oh, it is on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
Like and subscribe. Don't forget to press the bell button.
Yeah, but it was disappointing. You did not say that.
Dominic has already monetized it.
There are ads every 2 minutes.
But do we get to vote what you spend money on?
You should.
The YouTube comments can be very vicious and annoying. I wonder if they already arrived to your video on YouTube.
Oh, I have moderation turned on, so
Oh,
I
yeah.
have to approve everything. So I already got one pawn comment and one comment being, do you want to be friends? I don't think I do.
Yeah. That was me. Kidding. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Shall we start, or do you need to restart the? Okay, it is recording, right? Okay, so we're ready for our second presentation. So our next speaker is Xiaohui, who's Nanyang Assistant Professor at NTU, Singapore. Zhihao got his PhD from Tsinghua University, and he has also undertaken a postdoc at MPI, Germany. Today, he's going to present a paper which was awarded the Best Student Paper Award at this year's AAAI. So we look forward to your presentation, Zhihao.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. As Harris mentioned, this work has very fortunately won the Outstanding Student Paper Award at AAAI this year. So as the award title suggests, much of the contribution needs to be credited to the brilliant students and postdocs involved in this project. So I want to first introduce them a little bit. So they are, according to the alphabetical order, first Zihao Li, who is now a 4th-year undergraduate student at Tsinghua University at Beijing, and Jinyan Liu, who is now a final-year PhD student at Hong Kong University. Shengxin Liu is currently a postdoc here at NTU, and finally, Xinhang Lu is a 3rd-year PhD student at NTU. So this work cannot be done without their brilliant effort, so much of the credits needs to go to them as well. Okay, now we go back to the topic. So today we're going to talk about fair division. So the central question is, how can we allocate a set of scarce resources among individuals fairly? This is part of the theory that has been around since the 1940s, and there are an enormous number of applications. I will just give you maybe 2 simple examples. So let's say in heritage division, let's say there are multiple heirs, and together they may want to divide, such as a piece of land or other things like some valuable artworks. And they want to do this in a fair manner. So these are just examples, but at least these 2 specific examples on purpose, because we represent 2 major classes of fair division problems. And they are characterized by the type of resources to be allocated. So the first class is divisible resource allocation. That means land can be divided into arbitrary precision. And in the second class, which has also gained quite a lot of popularity over the past few years, is indivisible resource allocation. So here we are to allocate indivisible items, such as artworks here, or maybe others like cars or houses. So in this talk, I will first talk about each of these 2 classes independently very briefly, and then I will discuss how to combine these 2 classes together. All right, so we start with the divisible resource allocation. There are many different models, but here we will focus on a very classic model known as the cake cutting model. Because of the time constraints, I will assume that most people here hopefully are familiar with some of the basic concepts in this model. So I will only introduce the model very quickly and very briefly. So here is the setting. In a cake cutting problem instance, we want to, let's say, allocate a single heterogeneous cake, which is represented by a one-dimensional interval 0, 1, okay, among a set of n agents. So we want to find a partition of the allocation is a partition of the cake into n different parts, where each Ci is just a subset of this 0, 1 interval that is the piece of cake that we want to give to agent I. So note here that this Ci doesn't need to be connected, so it could be the union of many disjoint, like small pieces. We then say each agent I also has a density valuation, a density of function that maps, you consider this as a probability density function if you will, if you want. This maps 0, 1 to a real number. And the utility, okay, of an agent getting a piece of cake is just the integration of this density function over this piece of cake. And finally, how to represent and access to this density function, we're going to use the standard so-called Robinson-Webb query model. That is, we assume to have 2 types of queries to access this density function input. And these are first an evaluation query and then a cut query. All right, now we define fairness. So for fairness, we want to adopt one of the most well-studied fairness notion in this area, which is Envy-Freeness. So quickly speaking, we say an allocation is so-called envy-free if every agent feels that their own share is at least as good as the share of any other agent. This is a mathematical formula. We also know that a fair envy-free allocation always exists for any number of players. It can also be found by a protocol in bounded time in this Robinson-Webb model. So the last result is a recent breakthrough in 2016 by none other than our host, Aziz, and his collaborator, Simon McKenzie. Okay, so that's the cake cutting model that I want to talk about. This is just some brief setting. Let me see if there are any questions at the moment. Okay, seems none. All right, so for the second part, let's go to the indivisible resource case. Okay, so for indivisible resource allocation, we want to now allocate a set of indivisible items. So the model here is very similar to cake cutting, and it's also quite simple. So here we're assuming that the resource is now a set of indivisible items, set of m different items. We want to allocate them among n different agents. Now we want to find an allocation, which is a partition of these m items into n different subsets. So mi is now just a subset of the items that we want to give to agent I. We're going to assume that each agent will have a value for each item in this set. Also, a crucial assumption is that we're going to assume each agent will have additive utility in the sense that the value of an agent to a subset of items is just going to be the sum of the values of this agent to each item in this subset. Okay, so now we talk about fairness. So for fairness, we cannot use envy-freeness anymore because with indivisible resources, an envy-free allocation may not always exist. So what we want to think about is what kind of envy-free notion that can we always guarantee in this phase of indivisibility. So here the notion that we will use, which is also quite well studied in the literature, is called envy-freeness up to 1 good, short for EF1. So basically it says that an allocation is EF1 if it's either envy-free or any agent that an agent has towards another agent can be removed if we by removing some good, some single good from the later agent's bundle. So this is the mathematical formulation, math formulation. And we also know that a EF1 allocation in this indivisible setting always exists. It can also be found in polynomial time by many different algorithms. Okay, so now we have discussed the two models very briefly. We have discussed how to define and achieve fairness in the divisible setting and in the indivisible setting. So the next question seems, I would say, quite straightforward, is that in many cases, we do not actually only have divisible resources or only have indivisible resources, but we actually have a mixture of them. Okay? So to give you an example, in the heritage division example that I just mentioned, the inheritance to be allocated may contain things like land and money, which are divisible, as well as houses, cars, and artworks, which are indivisible. Let me give you another, let's say, timely example. So we know we currently were in this very special period of time. So in this current COVID pandemic situation, we say the government needs to allocate treatment resources or healthcare resources among patients or even healthy people. And these are very scarce resources, and it's of the utmost importance to allocate them in a very fair manner. But here, the resource also both contain indivisible ones like masks, maybe personal protective equipments, and divisible ones such as money or maybe the amount of time to use a ventilator. So our question in this setting is really to say, we want to ask, how should we define fairness when we have both divisible goods and indivisible goods at the same time, and how to achieve it? Okay, so before we talk about fairness, let's first briefly say how to combine the previous two models first into a single coherent model. So it's very simple. Assuming that in this new model, we now have first m indivisible items and one divisible item, one cake, to be allocated. So here you can also consider we may have multiple different cakes, multiple divisible items, but we can actually view all these cakes together into a single big cake. So this is really without loss of generality. And now we're going to assume that each agent can have first a valuation function for the indivisible goods and also a density function for the cake. And we say an allocation now is just an allocation of both the indivisible items and the divisible cake. And finally, we're going to assume that agents will have additive utility across the domain. That means the utility of the agent is just going to be the utility of this agent for the indivisible items and plus the utility for the agent for the cake. All right, so this is the basic setting. Now we can look at fairness. So we want to ask ourselves, what do we want in a good fairness definition in this setting? Well, I want to argue there are two things that I care. So first, we should guarantee its existence in this domain. And second, I want to say it should reflect what we normally perceive as fair in a very intuitive way. So I think these are like very reasonable requirements. So let's look at some candidates. First, we say, can we use like either Envy-Freeness or EF1 in the previous settings? We say this may not be a good idea because now this mixed good setting is a more general setting that generalizes both divisible setting and indivisible setting. So for Envy-Freeness, for example, when we have only indivisible goods, Envy-free allocation may not always exist. For EF1, although it always exists, but for example, if we only have one single divisible cake, then maybe we can give this cake, the whole cake, to any of the agents. This is going to be counted as EF1, but it's obviously not very fair. So now we can ask, okay, if these twos are not good, how about a third option? How about we use an Envy-free allocation for the divisible goods, and then we're going to use an EF1 allocation for the indivisible goods independently, and then we combine these two allocations together. So in the following, I would argue that although this looks promising, but this is also not the best solution. This may not produce a fair solution in some scenarios. So let me give you one example. Assuming we have a simple example where we have two players, two agents, together they want to allocate a house and $10. And let's further assume that this house is worth $2 to each of the agents. So clearly this is not Singapore house. Maybe this is really very imaginative, very cheap house. Okay, so if we really want to adopt our last definition, how should we do this? So first, let's allocate the house because we only have one indivisible item. So we have to give it to one agent. Let's say, for example, we give it to the first blue agent. And this is EF1. And second, we say we want to allocate the $10 to them in an envy-free allocation. So obviously, we should give each agent $5. But now you look at this allocation, we say, in this allocation, the second agent, the red agent, is not really happy because she would think that since she doesn't get the house, probably she should get more money to compensate his lack in getting the house. Okay? So I would even argue in this scenario, what should be a fair allocation is that we should probably give the first agent a house and $4, and then give the second agent $6. So this is only a very simple example, but this demonstrates that there are problems with the previous definitions. And in this new setting, we really need a new fairness notion for the mixed good setting in a very natural and intuitive way. All right, so next we come up with our definition. So what we propose is a new envy-freeness notion for the mixed good setting, which we denote as EFM. So here is the definition. We say an allocation in this mixed good setting is called satisfies EFM if it satisfies the following properties. We say for any two agents I and J, okay, we say first, if agent J's bundle consists of only indivisible goods, there's no divisible cake in this bundle, then agent I is allowed to compare his bundle to this bundle using the EF1 criteria. Okay, in other words, we allow envy from agent I to agent J, but this envy should be eliminated by removing some item, single item from agent J's bundle. But otherwise, okay, in second case, if agent J's bundle consists of any positive amount of divisible cake, okay, of divisible goods, then the agent I needs to compare his own bundle to agent J's bundle using the more strict envy-free relation. Okay, that means agent I should think that his own bundle should be at least as good as agent J's bundle. So this is the definition. This, if allocation satisfies this property, we'll call this an EFM allocation. So let me say it again because I think this is really important. In an EFM allocation, envy can only exist from some agent I to some agent J if agent J's bundle consists of only indivisible goods. And even in that case, we should be able to find some item in J's bundle such that if we remove that item from that bundle, this envy disappears. So this is our definition. Well, first, we argue this makes intuitive sense. And also this is EFM definition is a generalization of both EF and EF1 to this mixed goods setting, in the sense that if we only have divisible goods, you can see this definition reduces to the envy-freeness. And if we only have indivisible goods, this definition then reduces to EF1. So it's a nice combination of these two things into this coherent setting. Okay, so now we have this definition. I hope you're convinced that this is a somewhat reasonable definition. The next important question is obviously its existence. So our main result in this paper is that we showed an EFM allocation in the mixed good setting always exists for any number of agents. So in the remaining maybe 5 or a few more minutes, what I hope to do is I want to show you the idea of this proof. Okay, so here is the proof sketch. We want to show you a somewhat constructive proof in the sense that we want to design an algorithm, and here are the flow of the algorithm. So the algorithm will start with an EF1 allocation of the indivisible goods. So we first allocate all the indivisible goods in an EF1 manner. And then this algorithm will iteratively and of course very carefully add more and more cake to this allocation. Okay, until all the cakes are allocated. And we want to ensure that throughout this process, this EFM condition is always guaranteed, is always maintained. So this is the big picture. Now let's go into some details. So to prove this result, we're going to need help of a very useful structure called the envy graph. This is a quite standard structure that has been used in many, many places. So basically, this envy graph is based on allocation. So when the allocation is given, the envy graph is just a directed graph of agents. So it has two types of edges. First, we say it has an envy edge from agent I to agent J if agent I thinks agent J's bundle is strictly better. Okay, if agent I really envies agent J's bundle, then there's an edge from I to J. And second, we say there is an equality edge from agent I to agent J if agent I thinks that her own bundle is exactly as good as agent J's bundle. So to give you a very simple example, this is a simple instance of 3 agents together allocating, dividing 3 indivisible items. These are the valuations. And if you make the allocation in this fashion, we give the house to the first agent, car to the second one, and diamond to the third one. This is going to be the bottom right, going to be the Envy graph constructed from this allocation. So this is the Envy graph. Now, we want to say with the help of this Envy graph, we can define further a few very useful structures. So the first useful structure is what we call an edible set. What is an edible set? We say in an Envy graph, an edible set is defined as a subset of agents, we call it S, that satisfy the following 2 conditions. So the first condition, we say there should be no Envy edges within this set S. That means within this set, there should be no strict Envy. And second, we require that there is no edge, either Envy edge or equality edge, from anyone outside of this S to inside of this S. In other words, we say for any agent outside of this set, they must think that their own bundle should be strictly better than anyone in the set. Okay? So this is an example. You can see for this graph, these bottom 2 agents, they together form an edible set. So once we have an edible set, what should we do? So the idea is very simple. If we have an edible set, what we can really do is it gives us room to add some cake to the agents in the edible set, such that still there's no new Envy introduced. So there are a few questions, of course. First is, in what way should we add the cake to the agents in this set? So we need to do it very carefully in order to not introduce any new Envies. In particular, what we really want to find is a so-called perfect allocation in cake cutting. So a perfect allocation is an allocation such that every agent thinks all the pieces all have exactly the same value. So we want to add such a perfect allocation to the agents in the set, such that there's no new Envy introduced within the set. And next, we also need to ask how much cake should we add to this set. So we want to add maybe only a small amount until the point where there's an equality edge from somewhere outside S to inside. Okay? So this is what we're going to do with edible sets. The second structure that we're going to talk about is called Envy cycle. So an Envy cycle, again in the Envy graph, is defined to be a cycle, a directed cycle, with at least one Envy edge. And the other edges, they could be either Envy edges or equality edges. So like in the same example, we can see these 3 edges, darkened edges, they together form an Envy cycle. So once we have an Envy cycle, what should we do? When we have an Envy cycle, there is a very commonly seen approach, is that we can do a so-called Envy cycle elimination. That means if we have a cycle, we're just gonna assign every agent in the cycle the bundle, the allocation that it points to. Okay. So in this fashion, because every agent weakly prefers the next bundle. So if they get the next bundle, their utility weakly increases. So again, we don't introduce any new Envy, and at least one Envy edge will be removed. Okay, so now we have defined 2 structures. The first one is edible set. The second one is Envy cycle. We have also talked about what should we do with when we have each of these 2 structures. And finally, things are linked together by a very key lemma. So this key lemma will show that in any Envy graph, at any point of time, there always exists either an edible set or an Envy cycle. So we can always find one of these 2 structures. And that basically finishes the proof of this algorithm. Okay, so that means we're going to continue to look for these 2 structures. We're going to do our operations accordingly. So this lemma allows us to always make progress. We're going to repeat this until all the resources are allocated. So we can see this process going to eventually terminate. Actually, it will terminate in polynomial rounds, and the allocation is going to always be EFM. Okay? So this is going to be the end of the proof. Okay, so now we have our existence proof. Moreover, we actually have an algorithm, and what's more is even we say a polynomial time algorithm. But here we have a caveat, is that this is only a polynomial time algorithm if we know how to allocate a cake, how do we find a perfect allocation in cake cutting. Okay, because this is the step that we need in the previous step. But very unfortunately, we have also known that perfect allocation, although we know it always exists, okay, but this allocation cannot be implemented in the Robinson-Van model in bounded time. Okay? So that means we still have a big open question left. That is it possible to design an EFM protocol in the Robinson-Van model in bounded time? Okay, we don't know the answer, but we think this is a very important open question in this direction. And finally, let me say, I'm already running out of time. Let me say just a few words. We also studied that if we don't know how to do EFM allocation, then what can we do in the Robinson-Van model? It turns out that we can actually do approximately EFM allocation. So this is called epsilon Envy-free for mixed goods. Definition is very similar. The only epsilon approximation here is at this Envy-free relation. And we actually show that an epsilon EFM allocation can be found in the Robinson-Van model in time polynomial in n number of agents, m number of indivisible items, and 1 over epsilon. And this is a non-trivial algorithm, but we'll skip the details. So finally, conclusion. So in this talk, I talk about a new setting where we have, in fair division, where we have a mixed type of goods. So this is a unified setting that generalizes both divisible and indivisible setting. We propose a new notion called EFM, Envy-free notion. We show that it always exists, and it can also be found in polynomial time with the caveat. There are lots of open questions. For example, first we mentioned, is there a bounded EFM protocol in the RW model? We think is a very important open question. And there are many other questions. We think this is a relatively new area. So many questions people studied in the divisible or in the indivisible setting. You can ask the same questions in this new setting. So like EFM with efficiency constraints, EFM with both goods and chores, and many other questions. I think there are many other questions that deserves to be explored. With that, that's all I need to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you for a very nice presentation. Let's give him an applause. All right, so questions. Nisag has one already. So Nisag says, in the EFM definition, can you make the good removed from J's bundle independent of I, like in strong EF1, and still achieve it?
Okay, I see. Good question. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it. My gut feeling is that you can, because it seems to me that this EFM relation, as long as we start with an EFM allocation, we never adjust the allocations with it. Yeah, good question. I don't know really the answer. My guess is maybe we can, but I'm not too sure about it.
So if you start with a strong EFM allocation?
Yeah, so does it give us a strong EFM allocation? I want to say it's not really very clear to me, because during the process, we have this step of Envy cycle elimination, which requires the agents to exchange their bundles. So if our allocation is previously EF1, strong EF1, I'm not sure if it's still strong EF1 if the agents exchange their bundles.
For those of you who don't know what strong EF1 is, perhaps Nisag, who is one of the co-inventors of this concept, can tell us.
It's just that from an agent J's bundle, we can remove a single good such that all other agents would simultaneously not envy agent J. So the good that we remove from J's bundle doesn't have to depend on which other agent we want to prevent from envying agent J.
So in particular, round robin gives you a strong EF1 allocation. Any other questions? It seems like the presentation was very clear.
Harris, I had a question. It was the previous chat.
Oh, yes. Sorry,
yes.
I missed that one.
Right. So you lose the opportunity if you use perfect allocation. That means you lose the opportunity to exploit complementaries.
If you like chocolate better than strawberry and I like strawberry better than chocolate, we can both do much better. But using Alon's allocations,
yes.
I
agree. So basically, that's a good point. That basically means if we simply use our algorithm, the allocation outputted by our algorithm will most likely not be Pareto optimal.
Very far.
Yeah, exactly. But we still want to know whether there exists a Pareto optimal and EFM allocation, for example. So that we don't know. But our algorithm is not PO. That's a good point.
Okay, if there's no other question, I think this is a good time to conclude. And let's thank both the speakers and thank you all for tuning in at very different times. So thanks, everyone. So are we back at the same regular time next week?
Yes, that's the plan, to go back to 9 a.m. There's a little poll on the website, and most people seem to be happy with that time, with a few saying it's too early. I wonder whether those are the North Americans.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. See you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dominic.
See ya. See you
See you.
next week.
Bye.